Coming up on today's Locked On Dodgers, 5 resolutions for the Dodgers, and we go through all 5 of them. That's what's on tap, so make sure to keep it Locked On Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yo, Dodger fans. Welcome to Locked On Dodgers. This is a daily podcast covering the Los Angeles Dodgers, bringing you the smart fans' perspective on our boys in blue. I'm Vince Samperio of Chivezri and Fiends, here with Jeff Snider of Baseball Essential. The times we are together are rare these days, Jeff, but they are always more fun when we're together.
Absolutely. And I'm just trying to figure out how far to sit from the microphone or from the camera so that our heads are roughly the same size on the screen. Even though real life, I don't think they're roughly the same size. I think mine's a lot bigger. So maybe it's okay that mine's a lot bigger on YouTube too.
Yeah, this is a real representation right here. So today we saw an article on The Athletic from Fabian Ardaya, 5 resolutions for the Dodgers in 2022. We didn't do a resolutions episode this year just because, it's fairly straightforward, and even these 5 are a little straightforward to a certain extent. But there's a couple big ones in there that we haven't really talked about this offseason, and then a couple in there that we have. So we'll go through all 5 that he has presented. And before we get into that, though, just I want to thank you and remind you to make Locked On Dodgers your first listen of the day, every day. We're here every Monday through Friday, wherever you get podcasts, and on YouTube, and free. So can't complain about that. But let's hop right into this. There was no other news or anything. Jeff, you were not hired as commissioner yet, so your episode hasn't hit the right people as of yet. But there's still hope for that. But the resolutions, we're gonna bunch 3 of them together, and then the last 2 will be the second and third segments today. The first one is re-sign Clayton Kershaw. The second one is find a way to fix Cody Bellinger. And the third one is improve the bench. We've talked about all these to varying degrees this offseason, but I guess we can rank those, Jeff. Where would you put rankings on those 3 things or those 3 resolutions?
Like most important?
Yeah.
I think Bellinger's the most important. Bellinger, when he's right, is one of the best players in baseball. And, it's absolutely essentials, maybe not the right word, but the Dodgers are a much, much, much better team when Cody Bellinger is right than when he's not. And so, as much as it's important to me personally that Clayton Kershaw come back, to the Dodgers' success, Kershaw is more replaceable, or at least, Bellinger's going to be on the roster. He's going to be in the lineup, so he needs to be good. Kershaw not coming back would just mean that they need to replace him with another starter on the baseball field. The what it would do to me emotionally is a different question. But and then so yeah, Belly is definitely number 1, and then I guess I'd put Kershaw at 2 and the bench at 3. I think the bench is going to be in better shape. Maybe I might be more optimistic than a lot of people are. I think that we don't really know what they're going to do in free agency or even trades the rest of this offseason, if the offseason ever continues. But the fact is, chances are we're going to have a situation again where they have more starter quality guys than they have starting positions available. They have their backup catcher spot all locked up in Austin Barnes for another year. And then you're going to have, Chris Taylor or AJ Pollock or Gavin Lux or somebody on the bench every day, different rotating. And so bench depth is important. But yeah, so I think if I'm ranking, I'm going Belly, Kershaw, bench. How about you?
I think I go Belly, bench, Kershaw, and this is strictly like on field, like you mentioned, strictly on field. I think Kershaw, the rotation, the way it's set up, and not knowing exactly if Kershaw will be ready and everything else, there's really only one comparable guy available. We've talked about it, Rodon. He's the only one that could give you theoretically, good enough, good a good or better season than Kershaw. Everyone else is probably a little bit lower than him, assuming Kershaw's healthy and can throw. But I also think they have, as much as we've talked about starting pitching so far this offseason, they do have, Gonsolin, Pepio, Andre Jackson, Mitch White. Those are four guys that can eat up those last two spots if you really need them to, or the last spot, whatever, however, if they get somebody else. Whereas the bench right now, I mean, you look at the 40-man roster, and yeah, you're going to have one of those guys that you mentioned not in the starting lineup, but you look at the 40-man roster, and guys that aren't going to be starters that are on the 40-man right now are Jacob Amaya, Eddie's Leonard, Jorbit Vivas, Matt Beatty, James Outman, Luke Rayleigh, and then one of the ones that you mentioned earlier. So it's one of those. You're going to get Edwin Rios back, so he'll be in there as well. But you're not entirely sure what you're going to get out of him. Beatty's still kind of a wild card because we're not entirely sure what they think of him or how they're going to use him. So I think, from what we saw last year, the bench was ended up being a crucial spot because when guys did go down, the guys that are replacing them weren't that great. And then when everyone was kind of healthy towards the end, you still didn't have the guys come off the bench in key spots. And I think that's where it sits. And then obviously Bellinger is the biggest one because Bellinger can hide a lot of the flaws that are in the improving the bench and bringing back Kershaw. Because if Bellinger is right and he's giving you, you don't even need him to be MVP candidate, but an all-star quality player, that adds so much to the offense. It lengthens the lineup a lot more. Then you got Mookie and Turner and Bellinger and Turner and Will Smith and everybody else that kind of falls in line after that. And it just you're putting up 5 runs a game pretty much if you can get three of those 6, 7 guys in sync at one time. So I think he's the most important part, and also because you need to know if he's going to be part of your future. The bench can be fixed year to year basis. Kershaw, he's part of the immediate future probably, but not the long term part of it. But you kind of need to know what you have in Bellinger and what he's going to give you, and can you have more good seasons and bad seasons? So I think that's going to clear up a lot of things for the future because. As we know with these Dodgers, the wheels keep churning, but at some point, you can't have a guy like Bellinger come up, be a superstar, and then kind of fade away. And then you're like, well, we were counting on him. Maybe we drafted slightly differently when he would because we thought we had somebody that was going to be there for 10 years, and maybe he won't be there 10 years. So I think that's the most important part.
Yeah, for me with Bellinger, what it boils down to is health. I think that if he's healthy, he's going to be really good. And obviously, all the swing tweaks that he does and everything, I think it all boils down to health. And so if he can, have a good, healthy offseason, come into spring training, whenever that starts, be healthy and just have a healthy season, I think that's the most important thing. One other thought on the bench, I I wouldn't put money on this, but I think I'm higher on Luke Rayleigh than a lot of people are. I think, I keep going back to the thing we talked about last year, early in the season, where it was, I forget who it was that said it, but somebody said that the gap between AAA and the big leagues is bigger than it's ever been. And we talked about why that might be. And part of it was the lost season in 2020. And so I wonder if a year removed from the COVID year, if that gap will close a little bit, because the fact is Luke Rayleigh hit really, really well in AAA last year, and he hit really, really poorly in the major leagues. And if he could close that gap some, I think that he could be a guy who could come off, have a lot of power off the bench. And honestly, I mean, Edwin Rios, when we first saw him come up, he was overmatched in the big leagues. And then he ended up being a really valuable part of the 2020 team. And so I could see a similar path for Luke Rayleigh, maybe.
Yeah, it's possible. And hopefully that is the case because, like I said, he's one of the guys that would be theoretically on the bench right now. So, all right, we're going to talk about extending Trea Turner first. We're going to talk about that. But first, let's talk about Built Bar. Built Bar, best tasting protein bar. It's New Year's. Maybe you have some resolutions. It might not be about getting fit, or it might be about getting fit. But I'm sure everyone wants to eat a little healthier or find, a new snack that can help you out. Built Bar is the one for you. It's a protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, covered in chocolate. They got a bunch of different flavors. They're always adding flavors, changing flavors. Finding out what you really want. And it's low calorie, low sugar, low carbs, high protein, perfect to kind of maybe if you need to do a purge after the holiday season. Built bars are the perfect thing to help you with that purge. You can replace it with whatever you're eating now, whatever dessert you have, you can replace it with the Built Bar, and you're not going to lose much in taste, if anything, in taste. So Right now, you can go to built.com and you can use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. Go check it out. Go get you some built bars and let them know we sent you, I guess. We're back and we are well, let me first remind you to make Lockdown Dodgers your first listen every day. Every weekday we're here, but if you miss a day, you can also listen on the weekend. We're not going to tell anybody. So make sure to do that. And let's get into the next one, which is working on an extension with Trea Turner. I think I talked about this in one of the episodes where it was before Seager had signed. Like, would I want Seager or Turner? I don't think we've talked specifically about Trea Turner, like specifically Trea Turner extension. It's been in conversations that we've had so far, but I guess it's one of those things where is a Trea Turner extension necessary at this point? Should it be a priority? Do we even think he is thinking about that or he wants to play it out? We've seen a couple of times in past years where the Dodgers said they were talking about extension, didn't quite reach it, and then whoever that player was ended up getting way more money than probably they could have. They would if they would have way more money than they might have settled for an extension. Was that Greinke being one of them? Corey Seager maybe even being one of them. I don't know if that Seager thought he was going to get 325 million, but I guess what's your thoughts on the Trea Turner extension process?
Yeah, I go back and forth on this. Trea Turner is very, very good, and I like having him on the Dodgers. I'm not totally sure that he is their plan for their shortstop of the future. Whether that plan is Gavin Lux or whether it is Carlos Correa or whether it is somebody else. And so Trea Turner, in order to get him to forego free agency, it seems like they'd have to throw a lot of money at him. And I don't know, like something about Trea Turner, even, and it doesn't have anything to do with his postseason struggles. I know a lot of people soured on him from that. Um, Something about even as good as he is, something about him doesn't totally blow me away. And it's not, that's probably not quite what I even mean to say, because I don't want to give the impression I don't think he's very good. I think the Dodgers are a better team with him, and I think his skill set is likely to age pretty well. But it's maybe it's just because he hasn't been a Dodger for very long, and so we're not as emotionally attached to him as we were to Seager or some of these other guys. But if Turner was interested in talking about an extension that would be at somewhat of a hometown discount, not a huge hometown discount, but if he likes it there and says, okay, let's make something work out, something that works for both sides, I'd be in favor of it. I don't think that this would have made it. If I was making a list of Dodgers 5 New Year's resolutions, I don't think Trea Turner extension would have made my list.
Yeah, and honestly, I feel the same way. I love Trea Turner. Like every time the Dodgers faced him, I hated facing him. Especially 2016 NLDS. Like that's the first time you got a taste of him, and 2019 NLDS, and whatever the case is. And even though he didn't do that great, it's still once he was on the bases, I was like, damn. Now he's especially against the Dodgers, it just seems recent years they haven't been able to keep guys on base. So maybe that was part of it too. But I would say it was a little underwhelming. I don't know. It was fun, but he was kind of up and down, not as consistent. It was, he started off a little slow, then got hot, and then was kind of just and then got hot toward the end, and then like I said, playoffs. That wouldn't completely change my thoughts of him because everyone on this Dodger roster has kind of struggled in playoffs at some point. But I would say the overall Trea Turner experience was a little underwhelming. Maybe that's because I had higher expectations. It could be like similar to the Manny Machado era where yeah, the Dodgers don't make the World Series without Manny Machado, and I'm glad what he did, but it also felt like, damn, I think Manny Machado could have done more, or I expected more out of it. I think it's the same thing, and this always felt like the Dodgers were trading for Scherzer, and then they're like, well, if Trea Turner is also available, let's go get him. If it only costs us like one more big prospect, which theoretically probably what it was, but it did feel it's never felt like, oh, Trea Turner loves the dog. Like it wasn't an instant connection. At least it didn't feel like it. Maybe that's just the type of guy he is. But yeah, I definitely don't feel like an extension is probably likely really at all. It doesn't seem like that's something they're rushing to do. Look at some of his peripherals, and yeah, he has the speed and everything else, but I mean, he's not really dominating anything else offensively that stands out. Like if you're looking at the baseball savant page, obviously he had the good numbers, 328 batting average, 911 OPS, 28 home runs. He almost 200 hits, but I don't know. It was just it was a weird thing, and maybe it is because we haven't had him for a while, or maybe it was a lot of expectations I had personally put on him. But yeah, I'm not knocking down the door to do an extension right
Yeah, and some of it for me comes down to what I talked about on one of my solo episodes recently about stolen bases. And if Trea Turner can kind of be that catalyst that leads to the Dodgers as a team running more, I feel like that value is there because Turner obviously is very very fast, a very good base stealer, and I feel like there are a lot of other guys on the team who have potential to be maybe not as good as him, but to be good base stealers. And so if Turner could be D Gordon, except he can hit, then we have a ton of people still want D Gordon back, even though he wasn't very good. All he was fast. And if Trea Turner can be D Gordon but good at baseball, that would be do a lot to make me want him for a long time. I do think when it comes to his postseason performance, I don't believe I believe that 99% of the time, postseason ability is not a different skill than overall ability. And so I think that I think there probably are one or two guys who uh, actually do shrink under the pressure. And I think there's one or two guys who actually do step up to the pressure in the postseason. But for the most part, I think most guys are the same player in the postseason. And sometimes slumps happen, and sometimes they happen in October. We saw it AJ Pollock in 2019. We saw it with Corey Seager until 2020. He was bad in the postseason. Cody Bellinger has been really bad in the postseason and really good at times. Barry Bonds was one of the worst. He was terrible in the postseason until 2002. He had the best postseason anyone's ever had. And so there's all so I expect Trea Turner to be better in the 2022 postseason than he was in 2021 because he's a very good baseball player. And so, yeah, all in all, I'm in favor of the Dodgers having really good players on their team, and Trea Turner's a really good player. So I'd like him to stay on the team. And I don't even think, if they were to go after Correa or somebody, Turner has that positional flexibility, whether second base or the outfield or whatever. They could move him around and still keep his bat in the lineup. So, there's a lot of possibilities there. And I like having Trey on the team, and I hope he has a really good season.
now. Yeah, and like I said, he can easily sway me with another strong season. The other part too is the Rangers probably. I wouldn't say, yeah, I would say overpaid for Corey Seager. I did not expect Corey Seager to get that much money. The Mets definitely overpaid Francisco Lindor because they were trying to make the splash with their new owner. And then I'm really interested to see in what Correa gets because there's not that many teams theoretically that have 300 million to spend or need a shortstop that bad. So I'm very interested to see what Correa gets, to see if that kind of sets Trea Turner's market. Obviously, if he goes into free agency, there's always going to be somebody that wants to spend more or ends up spending more than you may think, and maybe that's what he's banking on. But I do think that also depending what happens with the CBA, the Dodgers, could benefit from waiting and saying, you know what, if you want to take your chances, go ahead. But we have our offer here that we know we're not going to probably change. And if you want to come back and take that offer, you can go right ahead.
Yeah, if every team that needs a shortstop fills their shortstop hole this offseason, then yeah, that affects Trea Turner's market next year, and maybe affects his mindset on how amenable he is to an extension.
Yeah. Talking about another extension for Dave Roberts. But first, Bet Online is here and they got you covered this holiday season with more props, more odds, and more lines than ever before. As football continues its march through the pro football playoffs, and you got the one big bowl game left, the national championship. But BetOnline is your number one spot for all sports action, not just football this season. And right now, you can get a 50% welcome bonus with the promo code Locked On when you head to BetOnline's website on your laptop or mobile device. That's promo code locked on for a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Go check that out. Go get your bonus. From basketball, football, NHL, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite sports, so don't wait to take advantage. BetOnline, where the game starts. Okay, last resolution on here is extend Dave Roberts' contract. Dave Roberts is somewhat polarizing, maybe not 100% polarizing, but definitely more and more polarizing people on the Dodgers or involved with the Dodgers right now. He is, obviously due for an extension if the Dodgers want to give him one. Um, Maybe there's something they're working on. We're not sure, but I know there's people that would not want to extend him, and I know there's people that do want to extend him. I would imagine we're both in the same boat, but probably have different reasonings or thoughts about it, Jeff. So you're up first.
Yeah, I am firmly in the all in favor camp. I think Dave Roberts uh, has the number one skill that you can't teach for a manager, and that's the people skills, the managing people ability. I shouldn't say you can't teach it. It's very hard to teach that, and I don't know that you can ever be as good at it being taught it that as you are just being born with it, or learning it growing up, or whatever it is that Dave Roberts has. I believe that Dave Roberts is the best manager of people in Major League Baseball, and everything else can be taught. The foibles that he has as an in-game manager, he can be taught. There are ways to learn, and I think a lot of people who think that he has more in-game problems than I do. I think I just disagree with them on a lot of things. But yeah, there are some things that Dave Roberts, I think he gets wrong, and uh, I could be wrong about that. But if I am right on any particular thing, those are things that the Dodgers employ a lot of smart people to figure those things out. And I believe that Dave Roberts is interested in learning them. And so I think, I would hope that Dave Roberts learned a thing or two in the 2021 postseason about using starting pitchers in relief. Um, I part of me would have hoped that he had learned that a little bit in 2019, but the whatever it is, that's a specific example. All these things, in any specific in-game issues he has, I think he can learn, and I think that all of those things are far outweighed by the fact that players love playing for him. And for all his in-game issues, Dave Roberts, win percentage wise, is one of the most successful managers in baseball history. And so, you know, people say, well, anybody can win with that roster. That's not true. There have been plenty of talented teams over the years that didn't win. And the fact that Dave Roberts, yes, the Dodgers have spent money putting together a good roster, but Dave Roberts is a great manager of people and a very good baseball manager, very successful. And I think the Dodgers should keep him as long as he wants to be around, basically.
I agree with that, and I think last year, I think that Giants series was probably one of his better managed series in general. Just the way he wasn't afraid to pull guys early, went to the bullpen, trusted the bullpen for the most part. I think it like I said, it bit him a little bit, and then it was CS trying to go maybe get a little too cute, than rather than use some guys or trust some guys that were maybe unproven or rookies, whatever the case is. I think he did go a little bit, different in the NLCS. But I do think NLDS was one of the more better managed games. Even the wild card game, pulling Scherzer that early, not something that's easy to do, and keeping people happy, utilizing the bullpen and getting those guys and getting through that game, and it worked out for him. And in terms of the past, yeah, he has made mistakes, and there's still some times where we don't necessarily always agree with what he does, but for the most part, it comes down to sometimes you need guys to do their job too. And the other part too is same thing you mentioned, the manager of people. People take for granted what we've had with the Dodgers these last 8, 9 years. Because when you have that much talent on a team, yes, it might be easier to win if they all play right, but it's also a lot easier to fall apart. We've seen teams with a lot of good players fall apart with the Padres last year. that manager wasn't equipped to handle all those personalities or whatever the case was, communication, everything. The Padres had a good team. They should have been in the playoffs. They weren't in the playoffs, and that came down to management. And as we saw, they fired their manager and they got a new manager. And I think it's a good move for them because Bob Melvin's been around for a while, and he's a guy that knows how to handle a clubhouse. With the A's, it's a little bit different. They have a lot of talent, but they also like bring in a lot of people and have a little bit different quirks in here and there. And managing that is different. The fact that Jock Peterson and Kike and all these guys leave and say Dave Roberts, the communication was always there. I never had an issue, even though they wanted to be an everyday player, but we never hear about it. We never hear about it in season. There's never anything that happens. Nothing ever leaks out. Even if there is issues, it doesn't leak out. I'm sure there's communication going on all the time. So I think people take that for granted a lot. And at the end of the day, yeah, he messes up sometimes, but so do the players, and that's just what it comes down to. And I think the reason that the regular season goes good every single season, every single year, is because he's in there communicating and being a manager and managing people. And I would not take that for granted as a Dodger fan, and especially as the Dodgers. And I don't think they are. I think Dave Roberts will be here as barring some crazy things that happen. I think he will be here as long as they need, because the stability, the managing of people, and he's probably, he's been getting better. He still makes mistakes in game, but it also comes down to the players make mistakes too. So
Yeah, and I honestly believe that when it comes to in-game decisions, the best manager in baseball maybe wins his team an extra 2 or 3 games a season, and the worst manager in baseball maybe loses 5 or 6 games a season. I don't think there's that big of a gap. I think there's probably a lot of people who really believe that Dave Roberts either wins or loses 15 or 20 games for the Dodgers, and I just don't believe any manager can have that impact. But where a manager can have an impact is, like you said, on having a team that is in the right mindset to play, in the right position to play, and playing. And you mentioned last year's Padres. My bold prediction before last season was that the Dodgers were going to finish 13 games ahead of the Padres. That was a bold prediction, and I was not even halfway to the correct number. The Padres weren't as good as the Dodgers last year, but they were not 27 games worse than the Dodgers last year. But they finished 27 games behind them. And a lot of that, it comes down to leadership, and whether that is a case of, the Padres having unmanageable players, or if it's a case of them just not having the right manager in place, I don't know for sure, but I suspect that if Dave Roberts had last year's Padres roster, they win 93 games, and that didn't happen with the Padres. And, I think Dave Roberts is outstanding. The one other note I have on him is one of the gripes that a lot of people have with him is during the regular season, they think he doesn't manage with enough urgency. And I think that I see that as so much of a positive, because we saw with Jock Peterson a couple of years ago, Doc's favorite phrase of keeping him relevant. Jock Peterson was awful and he kept getting at bats because Doc was keeping him relevant. And then boom, he picked it up and he ended up having a really good season. Chris Taylor in 2019, I think, started off terrible, awful, just could not hit. And everybody wanted him benched. And Roberts just kept playing him. And guess what? He figured it out. And Chris Taylor, the value he's provided to the Dodgers in 2020 and 2021, there's no way that he would have provided that value if Roberts had given up on him when everybody wanted him to in 2019. And, that list goes on and on and on. And so when we get annoyed at guys getting at bats, getting playing time when they don't deserve it, that is a pro. That's on the pro list, not the con list, on things about Dave Roberts as manager.
yeah, and when it's come down to it, or when the going got tough, or there was a way of them not either winning the division or a playoff spot, wherever the case is, they've made the changes. Like I said, 60-game season, he managed it like it was the last 30 games of the year the whole time. 2018, we saw the big platoon splits, the line changes, as we called it, where half the team would come in after the starter left. And when they've had to make the changes they had, and obviously in the moment, it's it sucks. AJ Pollock, one of those guys where we basically gotten rid of him a few times on this podcast, and he ends up coming through, and that's the faith that he has to have. And there's different conversations that are being had that we're not privy to, that we will never be privy to, that between front office and Dave Roberts and the other coaches and Dave Roberts and the players. And, there's a lot of that stuff, like I said, that a lot of us probably take for granted, or a lot of fans do take for granted. And, he's going to be the guy for a long time, barring any, crazy things, or he does happen to lose the locker room at one point or whatever the case is. But I just don't see it happening.
Yep.
All right. Those are the 5 resolutions. Thanks to Fabian Ardaya for providing those, and we riffed on them. So it's like a sampling music. We were sampling his article, and that's how we made today's episode. Jeff, you got anything else before we head out?
No, I don't think so. I did notice today this hat that I'm wearing. The only time I ever wear it is when we're podcasting. I actually just keep it here in my office and I throw it on. I have a different Dodger hat that I keep in my car for when I'm going out in public. I just, hop in the car and put on that Dodger hat. But this one is just my podcast hat.
Yeah, I think this one's becoming just my podcast hat too. So we're on the same boat there.
Yep.
All right, that's gonna do it for today's episode. Thank y'all for listening. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day. Tomorrow we will probably both be back here and talking about something with the Dodgers, maybe having a draft of sorts. We have a couple ideas in the bank that we need to prepare for, so maybe we'll have one of those tomorrow. But make sure to make your second listen of the day Locked On Bets, your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. Locked On Bets is hosted by your boy Q with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. It's free and available on our platforms. We are also on Instagram and Twitter, Locked On Dodgers. You can find Jeff on Twitter at Snider. I'm at Vince Samperio. DMs are open on all those accounts if you have any questions, comments, concerns. You can also send them via text or voicemail at 323-863-LOCK. That's 5625. Or via email, lockedondodgers@gmail.com. We're every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be with us when you get in your car or if you're at home. Tell your smart device, play a podcast, Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree. You just have to listen. Have a good one.
We'll talk to you tomorrow.